For 42 years, Julio Mendez has been cutting hair in the same barber shop on the corner of Madison and Halsted. He has watched the city grow around him, old buildings being torn down and new ones taking their place. But his little barber shop, with the red and white rotating sign, has remained a constant in the changing world. Julio has been a barber for as long as he could remember. He was 64 years old, and his hands, once steady and sure, were beginning to shake. He knew all his customers by name, and they knew him by sight. They came to him, not just for a haircut, but to talk, to listen, and to be heard. His barber shop was a part of the community, and the community was a part of him. Julio's barber shop opened its doors every morning at 7. He had a small but loyal customer base of working-class men who came in for their weekly shave and haircut. They were construction workers, bus drivers, teachers, and doctors. They were his regulars, and they always arrived by 8. Julio's wife, Maria, brought him lunch every day at noon. She always kissed his forehead and told him to take a break, but he never did. He loved his work, and he took pride in it. His hands had made him a living, and they had paid for his house, his 2 cars, and his children's college tuition. They had gotten his children to where they were now, with stable jobs and growing families of their own. He would never stop being a barber, not as long as his hands could still hold a pair of scissors. But one Tuesday morning, everything changed. A black SUV pulled up outside Julio's barber shop, and 2 men in designer suits got out. They were followed by a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. His name was Bartholomew Cross, and he was one of the richest men in Chicago. Bartholomew owned the buildings across the street from Julio's barber shop. He had just bought the entire block and decided to raise the old buildings and erect a luxury high-rise in their place. He wanted to meet with the shop owners and see inside their establishments before knocking them down. He brought his people with him, a team of social media managers and photographers who documented everything for his online audience. When Bartholomew Cross entered Julio's barber shop, he smiled at the shabby interior and the old barber chairs lining the walls. He laughed at the photographs hanging on the back wall, most of them taken in the same barber shop. They were pictures of Julio with his customers, all of them wearing big smiles. Julio remained silent as the man inspected the barber shop, showing no emotion. "Look at this place," said Bartholomew Cross, speaking to his social media team. "It's a complete mess. A single straight razor and a barber's pole. Tell your followers that this is what's wrong with Chicago." Julio said nothing. He was used to rude and arrogant customers, like Bartholomew Cross. They would come in for a haircut, talk big, and always leave dissatisfied. But something about this man's presence unsettled him, in a way that the others never had. Perhaps it was because Bartholomew Cross knew who he was. "Give me a shave, barber," said Bartholomew Cross, settling himself in the barber chair. "Show me if you can still work." Julio wrapped the shaving cape around the man's neck and picked up the straight razor. His hands were shaking slightly as he leaned over Bartholomew Cross's neck. But he quickly forced himself to calm down. He had worked in this barber shop for 42 years, and he knew that his customers were always right, no matter what they said or how they acted. He reached out and took Cross's chin in his hand. Bartholomew Cross looked up at the mirror and grinned. He was being filmed for his social media account, and he was enjoying the attention. His followers had shown an interest in buying and renovating abandoned places, so he was sharing this experience with them. A few of his team members were pretending to be customers, so they could all get their hair cut. Julio carefully shaved the beard hair away, watching for any sign of discomfort. His hands shook as he worked, and the camera hovered just above Bartholomew Cross's head. The man's grin widened as he looked at Julio's hands. "You're shaking, Barber," said Bartholomew Cross. "Tell your followers that your hands are shaking so badly that you're going to give me a bad shave." "Oh, wait. You're just another conman, aren't you? You can't afford a good razor, so you pretend to give a bad shave and then ask for a tip." His team members laughed along with him, but Julio said nothing. Deep down, he was angry at the man's words. Many people had called him names like that over the years, but none of them had ever said it to his face, and certainly not in front of so many people. "You've been doing this for 42 years, Barber," said Bartholomew Cross, staring at his reflection in the mirror. "What do you have to show for it all? This shabby little barber shop, this barber's pole, those old barber chairs. And now you're going to lose it all because you can't see the future." Julio carefully removed the shaving cape and set it aside. He knew that this man was testing him, trying to make him look bad in front of his friends and customers. But he also knew that he couldn't let that happen. 42 years of hard work and honest living were at stake. He had to show this man and the world that he was worthy of continuing his work in this barber shop. "Tell your followers that I'm just another conman," said Bartholomew Cross, watching Julio's hands as he reached for the straight razor. "Tell them that I'm too poor to afford a good shave." Julio's hands froze as he reached for the straight razor. He looked up at the man's reflection in the mirror, searching his eyes for some trace of sincerity. But all he saw was arrogance and cruelty. The man was enjoying Julio's discomfort, and that made Julio feel even more angry. Suddenly, Julio became aware of the smell that was coming from Bartholomew Cross's hair. It wasn't the smell of the straight razor oil that he was used to, and it certainly wasn't the smell of bay rum or any other common barber products. It was something else entirely, something metallic and unpleasant that made his nose twitch. Julio had never smelled anything like it before, but he knew it was something industrial, something not meant for people to smell. As he wiped the straight razor across Bartholomew Cross's face, Julio's eyes fell on the fine particles of this strange substance that were sticking to the man's hair. They were too small to see clearly, but he could see enough of them to know that they weren't something that was naturally occurring in the human body. He also knew that this man was wealthy and should have been able to afford better products. This was all very strange to Julio, but at the same time, it made perfect sense to him. Julio carefully removed the shaving cape and set it aside. He stared at the fine particles of substance sticking to Bartholomew Cross's hair, feeling a mix of anger and determination. He would find out what this stuff was, and he would see what this man was up to. He just didn't know what he would do with that knowledge. When Bartholomew Cross stood up from the barber chair, he looked at Julio in the mirror and smiled. "That was a decent shave, Barber." He touched the freshly shaved skin on his face and smiled at Julio's reflection. "But it's not good enough. I'm going to knock down this barber shop in 30 days. Julio sat in the barber's chair and watched the man's retreating back, his mind racing. He was thinking about his wife, his children, and his 42 years of honest work when an idea occurred to him. He would never take another customer to the barber shop, not if it meant risking his business and his livelihood. But he knew one of his regular customers could help him, and that customer was a retired EPA chemist named Robert Harrison. The next morning, Julio arrived at his barber shop an hour early. He unlocked the door and waited for Robert Harrison to arrive. The old man always came at 9 o'clock on Wednesday mornings. When he walked in, Julio locked the door and made sure no one could see inside. "Robert, I need your help," said Julio. "First of all, tell me what that strange stuff in the cross's hair is." Robert looked at Julio with concerned eyes as he removed the shaving cape and began to inspect the fine particles of substance sticking to Julio's beard hair. Julio carefully pulled a few of the particles off his beard hair. He set them on a small piece of paper and tucked it in his pocket. "Tell me what that stuff is," Julio said. "It's some kind of poison, isn't it?" Robert frowned as he stared at the small piece of paper with the fine particles on it. "Where did you get this?" he asked Julio, his voice low. Julio told Robert about the man named Bartholomew Cross, who had come to his barber shop the previous day and insulted him and his 42 years of hard work. He told him about the man's social media team and the strange smell that was coming from Cross's hair. He also told Robert about the fine particles of substance that he had seen sticking to Cross's hair and what he suspected they were. Robert sat down in one of the barber's chairs and looked at Julio with wide eyes. "Julio, do you know what that is?" He shook his head, then continued. "That's trichloroethylene, a solvent used in industrial waste. The manufacturing plants in Gary, Indiana, were dumping this illegally 10 years ago. The EPA shut them down, but this residue is fresh. It means someone is still trying to dump this poison." Julio sat down in the other barber's chair and looked at Robert with a grim expression. "And you're sure it came from Cross?" Julio asked. "Tell me why." Robert looked at Julio's face, noting the determination in his eyes. "Look at his properties," said Robert. "He owns old factories on the south side. He bought them cheaply because he wanted to hide something illegal. I suspect that he's been using those factories to dump toxic waste." Julio nodded slowly. He wasn't surprised by this information, considering what he had seen and smelled. He wanted to do something about it, but he also knew that it wasn't the right time. "I'll find the illegal dumping sites," Julio said. "Tell me what I need to do." Robert looked at Julio, then at the fine particles of substance on the barbershop table. They were the last thing standing between him and a lifetime of happiness and prosperity for himself and his family. "First of all, we need to gather evidence," said Robert. "We can't just accuse Cross of wrongdoing without proof." Julio and Robert worked together to find the illegal dumping sites, and eventually they found 3 of them on the outskirts of Chicago. Using federal EPA investigators, they were able to gather enough evidence to prove that Bartholomew Cross had been illegally dumping toxic waste for years. Julio then hired a federal investigator to come to his barbershop and take photos of